Alexander Sterling, 62 years old, with a $3 billion fortune, dressed in dirty rags, and headed to his luxury Ferrari-Lamborghini dealership in downtown Manhattan. He wanted to personally test how his employees treated poor customers after reading negative reviews online. What happened shocked him. He was literally kicked and pushed out of the store by sales manager Marcus White, who threatened to call the police if he returned. The words he heard cut like knives. "We sell $300,000 Ferraris here, not looking for handouts." The billionaire fell on the sidewalk under the amused stares of other employees who laughed at his humiliation. Alexander slowly got up, removed his worn cap, and looked straight into the eyes of the man who had humiliated him without knowing who he was. The next day he called an urgent meeting for all staff. What he revealed and the decision he made forever changed the lives of everyone present, proving that sometimes you have to hit rock bottom to understand who you really are. Alexander Sterling sat in his office on the 45th floor of Sterling Tower in Manhattan, looking out at the automotive empire he had built over 40 years. 62 years old, perfectly groomed grey hair, and a $3 billion fortune, he owned the largest chain of luxury car dealerships in North America. He had started from nothing in the 1980s with a bank loan and sheer determination. Now, Sterling Motors Group counted 80 dealerships across 15 states, representing exclusive brands like Ferrari, Lamborghini, Rolls-Royce, and Bentley. But that November morning, online reviews were deeply troubling him. Customer after customer complained about the same problem. Salespeople treated badly those who didn't look rich enough. Stories of people kicked out of stores for their appearance, young multimillionaire entrepreneurs humiliated, foreign clients discriminated against for their accent. Alexander had always believed he knew his company perfectly. He regularly visited the dealerships, but always announced, always welcomed with red carpet treatment. Employees showed their best side when the owner was present. But what happened when he wasn't there? The idea came spontaneously, an undercover test. He would disguise himself as a poor person and personally visit dealerships to verify the service level. It was a method some American entrepreneurs used, but Alexander had never considered it necessary. That evening, in the penthouse of his Upper East Side mansion, Alexander found the oldest clothes he owned: faded jeans, stained t-shirt, worn leather jacket. It wasn't enough. He took rags for cleaning cars, rubbed them in garden dirt, and put them on. Looking in the mirror, Alexander was stunned. He didn't recognize himself. Messy, dirty hair, unshaven beard, filthy clothes made him look like a homeless person, perfect for his experiment. He had decided to start with the Ferrari-Lamborghini dealership on Fifth Avenue, one of the most prestigious in the group. The store was Sterling Motors' crown jewel, with gleaming windows displaying $300,000 Ferraris. Inside, precious marble, soft lighting, and museum-like atmosphere. Alexander arrived at the dealership at 10 in the morning. Through the windows, he saw his staff at work. Salespeople in designer suits, showing dream cars to elegant clients. He was proud of what he had built, but now wanted to discover the hidden truth. He took a deep breath and pushed the entrance door. What happened in the following minutes would forever change his perception of the company he had created. Alexander's entrance into the dealership was like an intruder bursting into a museum. Conversations stopped, heads turned, smiles disappeared from salespeople's faces. The man dressed in rags clashed completely with the luxurious environment. The first to react was Matthew Cooper, a 28-year-old salesman. He approached Alexander with an annoyed expression, blocking his path to the displayed cars. He told him he had the wrong place, that this was a private store, not a shelter. Alexander, maintaining his disguise, lowered his gaze and said he just wanted to look at the cars, that he had always been a Ferrari enthusiast. Another salesman, Andrew Ross, joined his colleague chuckling and making cruel comments about his appearance and poverty. But it was sales manager Marcus White's intervention that turned the episode into true humiliation. 42 years old, manager for 5 years, White had always shown Alexander a servile face during official visits. Now facing what he believed was a vagrant, he revealed his true nature. White approached with menacing steps, asking what he was doing inside. Alexander tried to maintain character, saying he just wanted to look, but White interrupted him brusquely. He told him this wasn't a place for people like him, that they were selling $300,000 Ferraris, not looking for charity. Other customers had stopped to watch the scene, some amused, others embarrassed. An elegant couple whispered sarcastic comments, while a young man in an Armani suit filmed with his phone, laughing. White grabbed Alexander by the arm and dragged him toward the exit, threatening to call police if he didn't leave immediately. Alexander resisted slightly, not to escape, but to prolong observation of his employee's behavior. What he saw disgusted him deeply. Matthew and Andrew laughed openly, imitating his limping gait. Other salespeople had gathered to enjoy the show, none showing the slightest sign of humanity or compassion. Alexander insisted, saying he had always been a Ferrari admirer, wanting to see how far they would go. White's response exceeded all imagination. With a violent push, he hurled Alexander out the door, making him fall heavily on the Fifth Avenue sidewalk. Alexander got up slowly, feigning more pain than he actually felt. Around him, some passers-by had stopped to watch, but no one intervened to help. The dealership door closed with a sharp noise, and through the window he saw White bragging to colleagues about how he had solved the problem. Sitting on the sidewalk, Alexander still observed the store interior. The salespeople had returned to their activities as if nothing had happened. White was already showing a red Ferrari to a customer, the same servile smile as always painted on his face. In that moment, the billionaire understood that the empire built with such pride had a rotten heart. The values of respect he preached in company manuals were just empty words. His employees, when they thought they weren't being watched, revealed their true character, superficial, cruel, interested only in immediate profit. Alexander returned to his Upper East Side mansion with his soul in pieces. 40 years of work, sacrifices, building an empire he believed was based on solid values, and it had all proven to be an illusion. He took a long shower, washing away the dirt of the disguise, but not the bitterness of discovery. Sitting in his study, surrounded by awards accumulated over the years, Alexander replayed the morning scene. White's arrogance, the salespeople's cruel laughter, total indifference toward a human being in distress. These were the men representing his company. It wasn't over. Alexander wanted to be sure it wasn't an isolated case. That same evening, still disguised as a beggar, he visited 3 other group dealerships in Manhattan. The result was identical: humiliations, pushes, threats to call police. The most painful discovery came when he tested trusted employees too, people he had known for years, promoted, trusted blindly. All of them, without exception, failed the test. All treated the beggar with contempt and violence. Alexander spent the night sleepless, walking through the empty mansion. His wife Julia had died 3 years earlier. His children lived abroad. He felt terribly alone with this devastating discovery. He had built an economic colossus, but failed as a moral leader. At dawn, Alexander had made the most important decision of his entrepreneurial life. He called his secretary and ordered an urgent meeting for the next day. All employees of the Ferrari-Lamborghini dealership had to be present. On meeting day, Alexander arrived at the dealership at 9 in the morning. This time, he wore one of his $4,000 Brioni suits, handmade Italian shoes, Patek Philippe watch. He was again the Alexander Sterling everyone knew: elegant, authoritative, intimidating. The staff was gathered in the conference room upstairs, 15 people including salespeople, administrators and mechanics. Marcus White sat in the front row with his usual confident smile, convinced the meeting concerned some new sales strategy. Alexander entered the room, and silence fell immediately. Everyone stood in respect, as they always did. But there was something different in the air, a tension no one could decipher. Alexander positioned himself in front of the group and began speaking in a cold voice. He said what he was about to reveal would change the course of their working lives. And for some of them, would change their lives completely. Alexander walked slowly in front of the group, studying each face. White, Cooper, Ross, all those who had humiliated him the day before without recognizing him. Now they were there, servile and smiling, ready to please the man they had treated like garbage. Alexander began by recounting that the day before a man dressed in rags had entered the store, a poor, dirty man who just wanted to look at cars. He asked if they knew what had happened to him. The silence became oppressive. Marcus White moved nervously in his chair, a shadow of concern crossing his face. Other employees looked at each other with growing anxiety. Alexander continued explaining that this man had been insulted, humiliated, dragged out by kicks, and abandoned on the sidewalk like a stray dog. He had been treated as if he weren't human just because he wore poor clothes. Matthew Cooper lowered his gaze, his face beginning to pale. Andrew Ross nervously ran his hand through his hair. The atmosphere in the room became electric. Alexander specified the details. Manager White had literally kicked this man, yelling that they sold $300,000 Ferraris there. Cooper and Ross had laughed, making cruel comments about his poverty. White jumped up, his face pale. He tried to explain it was clearly a vagrant disturbing customers, that he had just done his job protecting the store. Alexander exploded with fury that made the windows shake, saying the job was treating every human being with respect and dignity, representing company values. White stammered that Alexander didn't understand, that the man was dirty, smelled, didn't have money even for a used bicycle, let alone a Ferrari. Alexander stopped in the center of the room, looking at everyone present one by one. The moment of truth had arrived. He revealed that man had been him. The words fell in the room like a boulder. White leaned on the chair to avoid falling. Cooper put his head in his hands. Ross began trembling. Other employees opened their mouths in shock. Alexander repeated that it had been him, their employer, the man who had built the company, who paid their salaries. And they had treated him like garbage because he wore poor clothes. White collapsed in the chair with his face in his hands, saying he didn't know, couldn't imagine. Alexander responded that exactly. He couldn't imagine that under those rags was a human being worthy of respect. Alexander explained that 40 years earlier, when he opened his first dealership, he was as poor as the man they had kicked out. He wore second-hand clothes, ate one sandwich a day to save money. If he had entered their store then, they would have treated him the same way. The silence that followed was devastating. 15 people who suddenly understood their careers were crumbling. They had failed the most important test of their lives without even knowing they were taking it. Alexander let the silence drag on, observing his employees' destroyed faces. Then he began speaking with the terrible calm of someone who has already made irrevocable decisions. He announced that Marcus White was fired immediately, without notice, without severance, without references. He had proven unfit to represent the company and its values. White burst into tears, talking about 2 children and a mortgage to pay, begging not to lose his job. Alexander responded implacably that he should have thought about that before kicking a human being. Matthew Cooper and Andrew Ross were also fired for the same reason. The 2 young salespeople collapsed, begging forgiveness and promising it would never happen again. But Alexander was unwavering. But the surprises weren't over. Alexander revealed the experiment hadn't been limited to that store. In recent weeks, he had visited all Manhattan dealerships in disguise, and the result had been identical everywhere: discrimination, rudeness, violence toward those who appeared poor. Horror on personnel faces was palpable. Everyone began understanding that no one was safe, that the experiment had been much broader than they imagined. Alexander then announced he was permanently closing that dealership. Everyone, without exception, was fired. No training existed that could correct the lack of humanity they had demonstrated.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
The collective cry of desperation filled the room. 15 people seeing their world collapse in an instant. Pleas, tears, promises of change overlapped in a heartbreaking chorus. Alexander added that the building would become an assistance center for homeless and people in need. Instead of Ferraris, there would be free meals, dormitories, job reintegration services. The symbolic transformation was powerful, the temple of luxury becoming refuge for society's outcasts. The very people employees had despised would become the new customers of the place. Alexander explained that the Sterling Foundation managing the center would be financed with profits from other dealerships. Every Ferrari sold in their locations would contribute to helping those who couldn't afford even a meal. Some employees desperately tried to get a second chance, saying they weren't the ones deciding policies, that they just followed orders. Alexander asked whose orders, since he had always preached respect and courtesy for everyone. If they had interpreted his teachings as license to discriminate against the poor, the responsibility was theirs. White made a last desperate attempt, recalling sales targets reached, millions earned for the company. Alexander looked at him with disgust, saying money could always be earned, but humanity you either have or you don't. The meeting concluded with Alexander ordering everyone to empty their desks within an hour. Security would escort each one out of the building. All badges had to be returned immediately. 6 months after that fateful meeting, the building that housed the Ferrari-Lamborghini dealership on Fifth Avenue was completely transformed. The windows that once displayed $300,000 cars now showed colorful banners. Hope Center, Welcome, and Social Reintegration. Alexander had kept every promise. The entire building had been converted into a state-of-the-art assistance center. On the ground floor, where Ferraris once gleamed, there was now a cafeteria serving 500 free meals daily. The marble tables had become meeting places where homeless, unemployed, and struggling families found not just food, but dignity and hope. The upper floor housed dormitories with 80 beds, showers, laundry, and a free legal assistance desk. In the basement, where the luxury car workshop once was, a professional training center now operated, teaching concrete skills: electrician, plumber, welder, mechanic. Alexander had wanted to be personally present at the inauguration, not as owner, but as volunteer. Every Tuesday and Thursday he served meals in the cafeteria, spoke with guests, listened to their stories. He had discovered that behind every face marked by poverty was a complex human story, often dramatic but always worthy of respect. The transformation hadn't been limited to that location. Alexander had revolutionized the entire business philosophy of Sterling Motors Group. Every dealership received new, strict rules. Anyone entering had to be treated with courtesy, regardless of appearance. Hidden cameras and periodic tests ensured compliance with directives. But most importantly, Alexander had instituted the Beggar rule. Every month, a professionally disguised actor, posing as a poor person, visited dealerships to test staff behavior. Anyone failing the test was fired immediately, without exceptions. The results were surprising. Sales, instead of decreasing as many had predicted, increased by 40%. Real customers appreciated the atmosphere of genuine respect and courtesy that now characterized all stores. Sterling Motors Group's reputation improved dramatically, attracting a broader and more loyal clientele. Marcus White, the former sales manager, had desperately tried to find work elsewhere, but Alexander had ensured the story of his behavior spread throughout the automotive industry. No prestigious dealership wanted to hire a man who had kicked his own employer, even if disguised. White ended up working as a clerk in an auto parts store with a salary 10 times lower. Matthew Cooper and Andrew Ross met similar fates. Their careers in the luxury automotive sector were over forever. Cooper found work as a mechanic in a suburban garage. Ross became a used car salesman at a second-hand dealership. Alexander had wanted their stories to become an example for the entire industry. It wasn't enough to be good at selling. You had to be a good person. Those who discriminated and humiliated others didn't deserve to represent prestigious brands. A year after the transformation, Alexander received a letter that moved him deeply. It was from Joseph, a former homeless man who had attended Hope Center in the first months of activity. Thanks to training courses, he had found work as an electrician, rebuilt his life, recovered relationships with family. Joseph wrote that Alexander had returned his dignity when everyone had turned their backs on him. The day he entered the center, he was a destroyed man. Now he had a job, a home, hope for the future. But most importantly, he had regained faith in human beings. It was stories like Joseph's that gave meaning to the economic sacrifice Alexander had sustained. Transforming the dealership into an assistance center cost him $2 million annually, but the fruits went far beyond numbers. Hope Center had become a model studied throughout North America. Delegations of entrepreneurs, politicians, and social workers came to New York to see how a billionaire had transformed a temple of luxury into a place of social redemption. Alexander had demonstrated that economic success and social responsibility could not only coexist, but strengthened each other. His company was more profitable than ever, but most importantly, had regained its soul. But the most ambitious project was yet to come. Alexander had decided to expand the model to other American and international cities. Every major Sterling Motors dealership would add a social assistance center alongside traditional business. New York was just the beginning of a revolution that would change the face of luxury commerce. The Sterling Foundation had also launched a scholarship program for young people from disadvantaged families, allowing them to study mechanical engineering and automotive design. Some of these kids had already been hired at dealerships, bringing new and authentic perspective to sales teams. Alexander had also begun collaborating with other luxury companies to promote what he called the Dignity Protocol, a set of ethical rules guaranteeing respect for all customers, regardless of appearance or economic situation. Prestigious fashion, jewelry, and hospitality brands had joined the initiative. Hope Center had also developed a job reintegration program specific to the automotive sector. Former homeless were trained as mechanics, electricians, body shop workers, and then hired in Sterling Group workshops. Many had demonstrated exceptional skills and work dedication above average. Alexander had also created a second chance museum within the center, where success stories of people who had managed to rebuild their lives were displayed. Each story was accompanied by before and after photos, written testimonials, and video interviews. The museum had become a source of inspiration for those going through difficult times. The media impact of the initiative had led Alexander to become an international reference figure for social entrepreneurship. Business universities at Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton regularly invited him as speaker to tell his experience. His book, From Luxury to Dignity, had become a bestseller in 12 countries. The Hope Center model had inspired similar initiatives across America. From Los Angeles to Miami, from Chicago to Boston, luxury businesses were starting to integrate social assistance programs. The Sterling Protocol had become a standard, studied in business schools as an example of how profit and social purpose could work together. Alexander had also established partnerships with major corporations like Google, Apple, and Microsoft to create technology training programs for disadvantaged people. The center now offered courses in programming, digital marketing, and e-commerce, preparing people for jobs in the modern economy. Every evening when he closed the office, Alexander passed by Hope Center. He saw smiling faces where once there were only shiny Ferraris, heard laughter and conversations where glacial silence of exclusive luxury once reigned. That physical transformation perfectly represented his personal evolution. He had understood that true wealth wasn't measured in accumulated assets, but in the positive impact you could have on others' lives. A disguised beggar had destroyed his pride as an entrepreneur, but had returned his pride as a human being. And when journalists asked if he regretted the drastic decision made that day, Alexander always answered the same way. "I lost a Ferrari dealership, but I gained hundreds of human lives. It's the best deal of my life." Because he had learned that sometimes you have to destroy everything you've built to discover what's really worth building, and that the most important test for a leader isn't how much they can earn, but how much they can love those who can give them nothing in return. The Fifth Avenue building continued to shine, but now its light illuminated the path of those who had lost everything toward new hope. And Alexander Sterling, repentant billionaire, had finally found the way to be truly rich, measuring success not in Ferraris sold, but in human lives saved. Like if you believe everyone deserves respect, regardless of how they're dressed, comment sharing a time you helped someone others judge poorly. Share to honor those who use success to help the less fortunate. Subscribe for more stories of entrepreneurs who put humanity before profit. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover who you really are. Sometimes you need to dress as poor to understand how rich you are inside. And sometimes the best revenge is transforming pain into love for others.